Daredevil is one of Marvel's most loved superheroes, thanks to Frank Miller's comics and the Netflix show. But it wasn't always like that. In his early days, Matt Murdock was considered a B-list character. Marvel was really close to canceling his comics because no one was buying them. And then Fox's terrible live-action adaptation turned him into a joke. But Marvel and Netflix brought him back and made him an icon. Today, we're diving into the rise, the fall, and the new rise of Daredevil. Matt stood out from the rest of Marvel's heroes right from his first appearance, not just because he was blind. Back in the mid-60s, Marvel usually introduced new characters in anthology comics. Spider-Man showed up first in Amazing Fantasy, Iron Man in Tales of Suspense, and Thor in Journey into Mystery. They only got their own solo series after they blew up and were guaranteed hits, once Marvel knew they'd be making money. But Marvel trusted Stan Lee so much that they let him debut Matt Murdock in his own regular series, simply called Daredevil. It probably helped that the designs were handled by Steve Ditko, the guy who co-created almost all your favorite Marvel characters. The actual artist, though, was Bill Everett, another Marvel legend who worked on Hulk and Doctor Strange. Stan Lee wanted to repeat the formula that had worked with Spider-Man, make a street-level hero with everyday problems so people could relate to him. That was Marvel's big difference from DC at the time. And to make Daredevil even more unique, Stan made Matt the first blind superhero. In this first issue, we get all the basics of Daredevil. His dad's life as a boxer, how Matt goes blind in a radioactive accident as a kid, how his other senses get enhanced, and how he tries to juggle his superhero life with being a lawyer. We also meet his best buddy Foggy and his secretary Karen. But Stick and Bullseye weren't around yet, and there still weren't any ninjas or Catholic references. Also, Matt was wearing a yellow and red suit. They changed his costume in 1965, just a year later, to try and make him more appealing, because he wasn't even close to selling like Spider-Man or the Fantastic Four. What's definitely worth pointing out is that Stan got letters from blind readers thanking him for creating a hero with a visual disability who represented them. According to Stan, the blind superhero was actually the one who could see the most.
It's so deep.
No, it isn't.
But critics back then weren't so kind. A lot of people mockingly called Daredevil the blind Spider-Man, and he was far from a sales hit. A couple crossovers with Spidey in the 60s didn't help much, and Daredevil's solo comic was almost canceled. In a last-ditch effort to get new readers, Marvel had Matt move to San Francisco and team up with Black Widow, who had just left the Avengers. For 15 issues, the comic was renamed Daredevil and the Black Widow, showing them as a crime-fighting duo. That's where this panel comes from, the one people love to take out of context to make Matt look like a total jerk. But I have to tell you that TikTok just lied to you. This was part of their roleplay. Natasha was Matt's ex at the time.
I did not know that.
Unfortunately, this duo didn't boost sales much, but it did catch the attention of Angela Bowie, David Bowie's wife. In 1975, Angela bought the TV rights for Daredevil and Black Widow for a year, which wasn't unusual at the time. Nobody really cared much about superhero rights back then, since the genre wasn't the cash machine it is today. Angela had the visionary idea to make a TV show with Daredevil and Black Widow as the stars, inspired by the comic, mostly because she really wanted to play a superhero on TV. They even did some photo shoots that got published in magazines, but since no studio was interested, the project went nowhere. 50 years later, and those two still haven't met in live action. With sales dropping every month, Marvel split up the duo, since the experiment had flopped. Daredevil moved back to New York in a back-to-basics kind of move, with slightly more detective-style stories and guest appearances by bigger names like the Hulk. But not even legendary writer Marv Wolfman could save the comic. It got downgraded to a bi-monthly release, which was a really bad sign. The most notable parts of this era were the debut of Bullseye, and that in 1979, a young artist named Frank Miller started drawing the series. Miller was almost unknown. He'd only done a couple of Marvel covers, but at just 22 years old, he told the editor he didn't like the scripts from writer Roger McKenzie, who was in charge of the Daredevil comics. Since Miller clearly loved the character and they had nothing to lose, editor Denny O'Neil let Miller take over writing with issue 168. That was a big deal because Miller would be both writing and drawing the comic, something super rare for Marvel or DC. From that moment on, Daredevil was never the same. Miller admitted he was way more into crime stories than superheroes, but he had to adapt to make a living. Daredevil was the perfect character for him. Let him tell a gritty crime story that just happened to have superheroes in it. The comic took on a dark, violent, urban noir style that matched the rough streets of Hell's Kitchen. There were fewer over-the-top superpowers, the stories got more grounded, and Miller really leaned into Matt's Catholic faith and moral guilt.
Along the way, I decided he had to be a Catholic because only a Catholic could be a vigilante and an attorney at the same time. So I think religion and politics both have a very profound relation to comics because cartooning is taking reality and making it more so.
He also introduced Elektra and Matt's mentor Stick, made Bullseye a recurring villain, and rebranded Kingpin as Daredevil's main nemesis. Kingpin had debuted in the regular Spider-Man series in 1967, but he had never faced Daredevil. He was considered a Spider-Man villain. But Miller's reinvention was so good that now everyone assumes Kingpin is a Daredevil villain. Well, except for Sony, since they still own the movie rights to the character, but that's a story story for another day. Miller wrote some iconic stories, like Elektra's death at the hands of Bullseye in issue 181. And even though he stepped away for a bit, he came back to write Born Again with artist David Mazzucchelli. In this story, Kingpin breaks both Matt Murdock and Daredevil, doing everything he can to completely destroy his nemesis. Thanks to Miller's comics, Daredevil became one of Marvel's most acclaimed titles in the 80s. The comic went back to monthly releases, sales were great, and Miller became a legend. Comic fans now saw Daredevil as a serious, well-written character and a real icon of the publisher. But outside of comics, nobody really knew who he was. Daredevil hadn't shown up in other media, so most people had no clue who Matt Murdock even was. But that was about to change. Knowing they could finally cash in now that the character was selling well, Marvel made a few attempts to bring Daredevil to live action. In 1983, ABC planned a pilot episode for a Daredevil TV show. The writer was going to be Sterling Silliphant, a Golden Globe winner, who actually finished a full draft for the pilot. The quality seemed promising, but sadly, the episode was never filmed or aired. We don't even have access to the script to know what the story would have been like.
That's a shame.
We had to wait until 1989 for Daredevil to finally show up in live action, in The Trial of the Incredible Hulk, a TV movie spin-off from the Lou Ferrigno series. Actor Rex Smith played Matt Murdock, who was Banner's lawyer, and also suited up to team up with Hulk. What stood out was that they didn't stick to the comic book design. Daredevil didn't wear the mustard suit or the red one. He had a totally black ninja-style outfit instead. They probably did it that way so it wouldn't clash with the rest of the movie, and because it was a low-budget production. But the weirdest part is that the black suit actually became canon in the comics 4 years later. Continuing his reinvention of the character, Frank Miller wrote a mini-series called The Man Without Fear in 1993. In this comic, he retold Matt's origin story, adding stuff from his earlier run in the 80s. We saw Matt training with Stick and meeting Elektra for the first time. Both characters had been created by Miller himself. In issue number 4, Matt wore a black suit to take on Kingpin's thugs and rescue a little girl. It was the same outfit he had worn in the Trial of the Incredible Hulk, a design that ended up becoming iconic. We saw it again in live action more than 20 years later. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Miller's work was so influential and sold so well that his version of Daredevil became the new canon. No one tried to change Matt's origin again, and every writer after kept Miller's tone and characters, with Kingpin always as Daredevil's nemesis. And now that he was super popular in the comics, Daredevil started showing up everywhere. In 1995, he debuted in video games as a support character in Separation Anxiety for Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. In this Spider-Man video game, Daredevil wasn't actually playable, but the player could call him in as a special assist. The next year, he had a bigger role in another Spidey game called Web of Fire. If the player rescued Matt from a trap early in the game, Daredevil became a playable character who helped Spider-Man fight Hydra. All that was left was for Matt to show up on the big screen, but that was way easier said than done. In 1997, 20th Century Fox got the movie rights to Daredevil. They hired director Chris Columbus, the guy behind Home Alone and The Goonies. He co-wrote a script with Carlo Carli that was loosely based on Miller's comics. It was going to show Matt's origin, his romance with Elektra, and a battle with Kingpin and Bullseye. A fun fact is that Kingpin's evil plan was to become mayor, the same motivation he had in Devil's Reign back in 2021, and later on in the Disney Plus series. This script had potential, but the project stalled before it got into production. Then a whole rights war broke out. Disney almost snagged Daredevil in the late 90s, which shows they were interested in Marvel characters long before the MCU even existed. But after a lot of back and forth, the rights to The Man Without Fear ended up with New Regency, with Fox still handling distribution. This time, they actually got the movie made. They brought in director Mark Steven Johnson, who didn't have the most impressive resume. But there was still a lot of hype, especially when they announced Ben Affleck would play Daredevil. Affleck was a massive fan of the character, and had written a foreword for the Guardian Devil comic collection back in 1999. So fans thought the movie was going to be super faithful to the source material. If Affleck signed on, it had to be the ultimate Daredevil adaptation, right? But that wasn't really the case. The movie hit theaters in 2003 and kept a few things from Miller's comics. We saw how Matt lost his sight in an accident, his relationship with Elektra, and his fights with Bullseye and Kingpin. Matt's abilities were actually adapted pretty well, but it was super obvious the studio was trying to copy the success of Blade and the X-Men. You can really tell from the tone of the movie. It tries to be realistic, but at the same time throws in a bit of comedy. And don't even get me started on the costumes. Daredevil and Elektra's leather suits look like they were pulled straight out of Bryan Singer's X-Men, while Bullseye's outfit looks like something from a parody adult film. Also, the playground fight scene is early 2000s cringe at its peak, so obviously the reception wasn't great. Critics tore it apart, Daredevil fans were disappointed, and the casual audience didn't really care about Matt Murdock like they did for Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man or Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. Even Ben Affleck later admitted this was the one movie he truly regretted doing, saying it was a total waste of the character. But it wasn't a complete failure. Daredevil made $179 million at the box office, which wasn't that bad considering the $78 million budget. Along with merch and DVD sales, that was enough enough for New Regency and Fox to go ahead with a spin-off starring Elektra to keep the story going, and to squeeze everything they could out of the Daredevil rights. Matt doesn't show up in this film except for a short deleted cameo where he meets up with Elektra in a dream, but this movie flopped really hard. The reception was way worse than Daredevil's, and it barely made $56 million at the box office, which ended up being an absolute loss for the studio. Any chance of a Daredevil sequel was scrapped right away, because the damage from the first movie was already done. The Man Without Fear had taken as big of a hit in live action as Deadpool did after X-Men Origins Wolverine. The adaptation was so bad that no studio wanted to touch this character ever again. No one expected Daredevil to show up in live action anytime soon, because his reputation was totally wrecked. But not everything in the 2000s was a disaster. The character stayed strong in the comics. First with Brian Michael Bendis and then Ed Brubaker, who dove into Matt's life when his secret identity stopped being so secret. These writers explored the legal and personal fallout for the hero. We saw Matt leading Hell's Kitchen, doing time in jail, and even briefly joining the dark ninja cult, The Hand. The Daredevil comics stayed top tier, even if the live action stuff didn't quite hit the mark. By the way, if you're enjoying this, don't forget to subscribe. I've got plenty more documentary videos like this one coming up.
Don't tell me what to do!
The live action flop didn't stop Daredevil from showing up in video games. He got his own game in 2003, but it didn't go so well. It came out for Game Boy Advance as a tie-in for the movie, and people thought it was pretty meh, just a basic side-scrolling beat-em-up. Its biggest feature was a radar mode that mimicked Daredevil's sonar powers to find hidden objects and enemies, but overall, the game wasn't anything special. The next year, Encore worked on a 3D game for PlayStation 2 and Xbox called The Man Without Fear, just like the Miller miniseries. It was based on that comic, and Elektra lives again, and it was supposed to be about a gang war in Hell's Kitchen after Kingpin faked his death. They even had demos and magazine ads, but the game got canceled when Encore stopped making their own games. Daredevil never really got the game he deserved, but he kept popping up in team-up games like Rise of the Imperfects and Ultimate Alliance. Overall, fans were pretty happy, since there was plenty of quality Daredevil content to enjoy, but the character hadn't really broken into pop culture the way the more famous Marvel and DC characters had. While Nolan's Batman was raking in billions at the box office, and your aunt was suddenly an Iron Man fan, only comic book readers were really getting to enjoy Daredevil in all his glory. Until the Netflix series came along. Since Fox and New Regency weren't using the character anymore, they lost the rights, and Daredevil went back to Marvel in 2013. By then, Marvel Studios was already up and running with the first successful shared universe, but they hadn't started making their own shows yet. With no exclusive platform or TV deal to release their projects, Marvel teamed up with Netflix to make shows about street-level heroes. Of course, Daredevil was going to be the headliner, and if his show worked out, they could build out the universe with Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, and Punisher. And the show didn't just work, it crushed it. In 2015, Netflix dropped the first season, which once again took inspiration from Frank Miller's comics. We got to see Matt's origin story again, his fight against organized crime, and him rocking the black suit from The Man Without Fear. But this time, the tone was dark, realistic, and super violent. No more slow-mo or leather suits. The showrunners weren't trying to go for a casual audience like the MCU either. They aimed to tell the best story they could with a pretty tight budget, and made it super clear this was a show for adults. The show format let them build the characters way better than any previous adaptation. We finally saw Matt's life as a lawyer, which barely got any focus outside the comics. We also got Kingpin's origin and rise to power, and they added key elements to the Daredevil mythos. In episode 2, Matt rescues a kid in an epic one-take hallway fight scene, something entirely new for superhero shows. Right now, hallway scenes are just part of Daredevil's identity. You expect one every time Matt shows up, and the cast absolutely nailed it. Charlie Cox really does look blind. Vincent D'Onofrio is both intimidating and unhinged, and even Toby Leonard Moore crushed it as Wesley, Kingpin's most trusted guy. Since it was such a high-quality show, people responded really well. Daredevil broke viewership records and became one of Netflix's highest-rated series, scoring 99% on Rotten Tomatoes. A whole new generation fell in love with Matt Murdock, something that never happened with the Ben Affleck version. Even MCU haters admitted this show was absolute cinema. Netflix didn't waste time greenlighting a second season, and they kicked off a whole street-level universe. Season 2 dropped in 2016, introducing Punisher, played amazingly by Jon Bernthal. We also got Elektra, The Hand, more killer fight scenes, and strong character arcs. But that's when they got too ambitious. Trying to replicate the MCU's success in theaters, Marvel and Netflix decided to connect all their street-level shows in 2017 with The Defenders. In this show, we saw Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist teaming up to fight the Hand and save New York. The premise and the intention were cool, but the crossover didn't have the impact they were hoping for. The best you could say is that it was decent, but that wasn't enough for Netflix to bring those characters together ever again. Even so, the season finale led straight into Daredevil Season 3, which loosely adapted the events of Born Again Again, the comic I mentioned earlier. Kingpin returned as the main villain, this time pulling strings behind the scenes and controlling the cops. They introduced Poindexter, an FBI agent Kingpin manipulated into impersonating Daredevil to ruin his reputation. This season had some amazing moments, like Matt sneaking into a prison, a brutal fight at the New York Bulletin, and a final showdown with Kingpin. By the end, Matt wins without breaking his no-kill rule. It looks like everyone's gonna live happily ever after, until the last scene hints that Dex is becoming Bullseye. They totally set it up for a 4th season, but then the rights drama hit again. In 2018, Disney ended their deal with Netflix so they could start making their own shows for Disney+. That meant all the Street Hero series got axed immediately. No one was gonna miss Iron Fist, but what was gonna happen to Daredevil? The show was still up on Netflix, but there was zero news about a possible 4th season. It was such a weird situation, because Daredevil was more popular than ever, and going through his best moments since the Frank Miller comics. But because of a rights issue, the show wasn't going to continue.
That is not
Fans launched the Save Daredevil campaign, begging Marvel to bring him back, calling it one of the best superhero shows ever. They couldn't just throw it away. But Marvel stayed totally silent about the Man Without Fear's future. Over time, fans started losing hope. Maybe Marvel didn't want to promote a Netflix show since the platform was a rival to Disney+. Maybe they didn't want a mature-rated show in their lineup. Or maybe Kevin Feige wanted to reboot Miller's stories with his own spin. It looked like Daredevil would disappear for years because of this rights mess. But actually, Marvel wasn't being mysterious. They legally couldn't use the character for a while after splitting from Netflix. That's why they stayed quiet. We had to wait until late 2021 for Feige to finally say something about this. He confirmed that if Matt came back to the MCU, Charlie Cox would still play him. He hinted that the Netflix series wasn't dead, and they'd pick up where they left off. And in December 2021, Daredevil came back. Vincent D'Onofrio popped up in Hawkeye's season finale, and Charlie Cox had a short cameo in No Way Home as Peter's lawyer. He didn't do much, but people lost it in theaters. This was an official confirmation that these characters were back for good. It was just a matter of time before Marvel announced they were going to continue the Netflix show, but now with Disney's unlimited budget. And they kinda did. At San Diego Comic-Con in 2022, Marvel announced a new series called Born Again, another nod to that classic Miller comic. But no one knew what story they'd tell. Season 3 had already covered the Born Again arc. Fans started speculating, and some got nervous, because Marvel wouldn't say if the Netflix stuff was still canon or not. Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio gave vague answers, saying their characters were the same, but the story might not be exactly the same. Basically, it sounded like a soft reboot. Some actors, characters, and plot points would stick around, but others wouldn't.
I'm so confused.
While fans were going all out on social media arguing whether the Netflix show should be canon or not, Daredevil popped up again in the MCU. He teamed up with Jennifer Walters in the final episodes of She-Hulk, showing up both as a lawyer and a vigilante. This time, he wore the red and yellow suit from his early days. For a few seconds, we even get to hear the Netflix series theme song again. Wish I could play the whole scene, but I'm not risking the video getting taken down over 5 seconds of that song. Matt went back to being a ladies' man, and they brought back the iconic hallway scene, though it wasn't filmed as well as the ones we'd seen on Netflix. Either way, Daredevil totally stole the show. Same thing happened in 2024, when he popped up again in Echo. He wore the red suit from the Netflix show and starred in a new fight scene that was awesome. It looked like Marvel finally got what fans wanted and planned to treat the character right in Born Again, which quickly became the most hyped MCU show ever. But then things got messy again. Turns out, the more cautious fans were right. Marvel really was going for a soft reboot of the Netflix shows. Only Charlie Cox, Vincent D'Onofrio, and John Bernthal were coming back for Born Again. Karen and Foggy weren't going to be in it, and Vanessa got recast. You don't need Reed Richards level IQ to know fans were not happy about this. But since Disney was in full content dump mode on Disney+, Feige had no choice but to greenlight the show, which started filming in 2023. The Daredevil fandom was full of doubts, since it looked like Marvel might want to change the tone of the show. Maybe they were going to turn Daredevil into a clown, like they'd done with Thor and Hulk. Things got even more uncertain when rumors about the plot started spreading. Apparently, Matt was gonna stop being Daredevil off-screen and only put the suit back on at the end of the season. The rest of the episodes were supposed to be all legal cases, just focusing on Matt's lawyer life. But when everything seemed lost, Feige ordered massive reshoots, worried the internet would tear the show apart and damage the Daredevil brand. This wasn't just a few extra scenes, like Marvel usually does. They rewrote the whole story. They brought back Deborah Ann Wall and Eldon Henson, and even got Aeled Zurer to return. They added direct references to the Netflix shows so everyone would know the past events were fully canon. And they threw in some amazing action scenes with the same style as the earlier seasons, but with way more budget. Just to give you an idea of how much they changed, the first 2 episodes in the season finale didn't even exist in the original version. It looked like this sudden shift was going to be for the better, but Daredevil fans still had doubts. Born Again was turning out to be one of Marvel's messiest projects. There was a good chance the show would end up as a terrible Frankenstein mix, like Suicide Squad from 2016, with the reshoots being super obvious. The only hope left was that Marvel had learned from its mistakes, and that maybe season 2 would be the one that actually worked. But Born Again proved everyone wrong. The show kept all the best stuff from the Netflix series. The acting is still top-notch, there are some really cool long-shot scenes with awesome choreography, the vibe is dark and violent, and throughout the whole season, we see Matt struggling with his moral code. There are some seriously epic moments, like Foggy's death, the fight with Bullseye, or Kingpin smashing heads in the season finale. It's still a bit too soon to say if these 9 episodes are on the same level as the Netflix version, because they're still pretty fresh in our minds. But, at the very least, it's one of the best series in the MCU, and it kept everything we loved about live-action Daredevil. The only real letdown is that they killed off Muse way too fast, but if they follow the comics, the villain might come back in season 2. I'm not going to tell you how, so I don't spoil the whole thing. After the great response to Born Again, the showrunner Dario Scardapani confirmed that season 2 is dropping in March 2026. It's pretty likely that Disney will keep renewing the show for even more seasons, because after all these years, Daredevil is still a quality stamp for Marvel. Of course, Born Again wasn't the only show blowing up online in spring 2025. Invincible Season 4 also broke the internet, since Robert Kirkman's project managed to beat both Marvel and DC. I break down how that happened in this video over here.
What has 2 thumbs and doesn't give a crap?